The Japanese destroyer's searchlight slid across the water like a pale, searching blade, cutting through the blackness with a precision that made my skin crawl. It passed so close to our bow that for a moment I thought the beam would lock onto us, onto our small wooden hull floating helplessly on the vast Solomon Sea. But it kept moving, sweeping past, missing us by what felt like inches. Every man aboard PT-164 held his breath. Our engines were cut to idle, barely whispering under the night, and all 23 of us flattened ourselves against the deck, trying to become part of the darkness. Behind that destroyer crept 3 massive Japanese transports, their silhouettes barely visible against the horizon. Deep in their holds sat at least 6,000 soldiers, men intended to reinforce Kolombangara and prolong the bloody struggle for the New Georgia Group. They had no idea that their voyage was minutes away from becoming a death trap. My watch read just past midnight. Technically, by Navy logs, it was the early hour of July 20th, 1943. 4 minutes from now, we were going to strike first. I've told this story for 80 years. It never gets easier to relive it. But it deserves to be told, because the world barely remembers what we did out there with these plywood boats the Navy called PTs. We were fast, we were small, and we were supposed to be expendable. But that night off Vella Lavella, 3 PT boats changed the tide of an entire Japanese reinforcement operation. And I was there, Chief Petty Officer Tom Harrigan, machinist's mate aboard PT-164. The sea that night was unnervingly calm, not a wave out of place. That's the kind of silence that makes your heartbeat sound like cannon fire inside your own ears. I remember gripping the torpedo arming lever so tightly my knuckles hurt. Lieutenant Russell Smith, our skipper, crouched by the helm, murmuring the countdown in a low voice. PT-157 and PT-109, John Kennedy's old squadron mates, were not with us that night. But T-157 and PT-159 were positioned to our flanks, forming a deadly arc in the darkness. No moon, no wind, just the hum of distant Japanese engines and the sound of my own heartbeat. 2 minutes. The destroyer ahead of us, likely Mochizuki, altered speed, its turbines vibrating through the stillness. Its sharp bow knifed through the sea, throwing up just enough spray to reflect faint glints of starlight. The Japanese still believed American submarines were their main threat in these waters. That's why the destroyer kept sweeping its searchlight in long, slow arcs. They were hunting the wrong enemy. 1 minute. I could now make out faint movements on the transports, silhouettes of soldiers leaning against railings, rifles slung over their shoulders. Some were smoking, the glow barely visible like fireflies. They looked relaxed, complacent, protected by the massive destroyer escorting them. They had no idea a handful of wooden boats, empty of armor, equipped with 4 torpedoes each, were drifting in their path, waiting. 30 seconds. Lieutenant Smith raised his hand slowly, signaling the squadron to prepare. Our engines remained at idle, using the momentum of our drift to keep us silent. Every man around me froze. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the ocean seemed to hold its breath. 10 seconds. The searchlight swept again. But this time, it paused. A shard of cold terror shot through me, because the beam hung dangerously close to our port side. I could almost feel its heat on my face, if it shifted just a few degrees. But it didn't. It moved on. And with it, the last Japanese chance to stop us disappeared. The moment the clock hit 0, Smith slammed his fist down. All engines ahead 1/4. Our Packard engines roared to life, blasting the silence apart. PT-164 leapt forward, lifting onto plane as we accelerated. The destroyer reacted instantly. Searchlights pivoting toward us, guns charging, tracer fire erupting from the bow. But we were already too close. "Fire 1!" Smith shouted. The first Mark 13 torpedo dropped cleanly into the water, hissing as it activated. The second followed immediately, angling hard toward the convoy's center. To port, PT-157 unleashed its own spread. PT-159 mirrored the maneuver. In less than 8 seconds, 6 torpedoes were slicing through the Pacific. White phosphorescent wakes snaking toward the transports like underwater lightning. The destroyer answered with fury. Its forward guns spat orange streams, shells screaming overhead. A burst erupted close enough to drench us in spray. The heat, the noise, the blinding flashes. It all blurred together into a chaos of light and shadow. PT-164 veered sharply to starboard, our engines screaming at full throttle. Then the sea itself exploded. A detonation so powerful it shook the ribs burst from the nearest transport. A column of water shot upward like a geyser, illuminated by orange flame. The ship's midsection tore open, spilling steel, smoke, and soldiers into the Black Sea. A second explosion followed seconds later as another transport was struck, engulfing its deck in fire. The screams reached us across the water, faint, chaotic, drowned by flames and gunfire. The destroyer panicked, turning hard to pursue us, but its arc was too wide. PT boats could turn inside their circles easily. We slipped into the darkness while shells burst behind us, the destroyer firing blind into empty waves. In less than 9 minutes, 2 enemy transports were sinking. The third was crippled and ablaze, and 6,000 soldiers who were supposed to reinforce Kolombangara would never set foot on the island. Behind us, the sea glowed with the burning remains of a failed Japanese convoy. Ahead of us, the night swallowed our wake as we accelerated into safety, hearts pounding, ears ringing, every man on deck knowing we had survived something impossible. That was the night America's PT boats proved they could strike from the shadows and change the course of a battle. And I lived to remember every second of it. We didn't speak for several minutes after breaking contact. No one dared to. The adrenaline was still hammering through our veins, and every ear strained for the distant rumble of a destroyer giving chase. But the night remained still. Only the low hum of our engines and the faint crackling of burning ships behind us disturbed the silence. One by one, the men on 164 lifted their heads, looked around, and slowly realized we were alive. The Solomon Sea stretched out before us like a vast black void. We throttled down, keeping our wake as narrow as possible. Smith finally allowed himself to exhale. "Good work, boys," he whispered, voice roughened by the smoke and nerves. But even then, not a soul celebrated. You learn quickly in the Solomons. You wait. You listen. You assume the Japanese have at least one more trick left to kill you with. I wiped sweat from my palms and leaned against the engine hatch, letting the tremble in my fingers settle. I had been in multiple engagements already. Tassafaranga, Kula Gulf, Blackhead Strait, but nothing compared to the sheer scale of what we had just unleashed. We were 3 small boats. They were a convoy that symbolized Japan's last push to hold the Central Solomons. And we had just shattered that push in under 10 minutes. The radio crackled with faint static. PT-157 coming through. 2 transports confirmed burning, 1 breaking up. You boys still breathing over there? Smith grabbed the handset. We're intact. What about 159? A pause. Then, scuffed but floating. Minor damage. No casualties. Miracles happen, I suppose. That night was full of them. The destroyer, unable to spot us in the darkness, had turned back to the surviving transport, choosing to recover survivors rather than hunt ghosts in the black. That gave us the window we needed. We slipped northwest, hugging the coastline of Vella Lavella like shadows, using the faint outline of the jungle to break our silhouette. I took my place near the stern guns, scanning the horizon. The night air was warm and heavy, carrying the distant smell of salt, oil, and burning fuel. The South Pacific has a way of imprinting itself on your senses, every sound sharper, every scent dangerous. You survive out there by feeling the ocean as much as seeing it. My mind drifted back to earlier that afternoon, when we received the intelligence that would put us on this deadly path. Coast watchers, brave Australians hidden deep in the jungle on New Georgia, sent word that a major Japanese reinforcement convoy had departed Buin at dusk on July 19th. 3 transports, 1 destroyer escort. Course south-southeast. Estimated arrival at Kolombangara by dawn. If they made it, the fight for New Georgia would drag on for weeks, maybe months. The Navy's cruisers and destroyers were tied up after the brutal Battle of Kolombangara just days before, on July 13th, where we lost USS Gwyn and damaged 3 more. The big ships couldn't intercept. The skies were too dark for bombers. That left only us, the mosquito fleet, as they like to call us, thin-skinned boats made of plywood, powered by aviation engines, crewed by young men barely old enough to shave. I was 23, some of the boys were 19, and yet that night, we became the Navy's only line of defense in a sea controlled by the enemy. Smith briefed us with the calm of a man who understood exactly how insane the plan was. We're to intercept off Vella Lavella, a coordinated spread. No signals unless necessary. Engage at closest possible range. Hit fast. Vanish faster. Simple words for a death sentence. But PT crews were different. We volunteered for this kind of fight. We wanted speed, danger, action. We wanted to matter. And off Vella Lavella we did. A soft tap on my shoulder pulled me back to the present. It was Radio Man Jenkins, his freckles half hidden under soot. "Tom," he whispered, "Skipper wants the engines checked. Says we pushed him hard." Hard was an understatement. We had run those 3 Packard 4 M2500 engines through hell. Full throttle, evasive turns, sudden drops to idle. I lifted the hatch and descended into the engine room, the heat wrapping around me instantly. The Packards were still glowing faint orange in places, metal ticking as it cooled. I ran my hand along the port engine. No cracks, no leakage, good pressure. Miracles again. The engine room had always been my sanctuary. Even in the chaos of battle, the steady rhythm of those engines reminded me that something in this war was predictable, reliable, under my control. Out there, under enemy fire, control was the first thing stolen from you. When I climbed back onto deck, the first hints of dawn were touching the eastern horizon. Not sunlight yet, but a faint silver smear above the treetops. The sky in the Solomons turns from pitch black to gray-blue faster than any place I've ever seen. We needed to be far from the ambush site by daylight. Japanese float planes from Kolombangara and Kahili took off early, hunting anything that moved. PT-157 pulled alongside us at a safe distance. I could make out the dark shape of their crew, faces smudged with sweat and smoke just like ours. We exchanged silent nods. We're alive. You are alive. That's enough. Behind us, the horizon still flickered faintly. The burning transports cast a dull orange glow on the low clouds, a grim reminder of what we had just done. Thousands of soldiers who would never see land again. War is not clean. It's never heroic the way people imagine. It's smoke, screams, darkness, and decisions you can't undo. But that night, July 20th, 1943, we did what we had to do. If we hadn't, the Japanese foothold in the Central Solomons would have solidified. The fighting on New Georgia would have dragged on. More Marines would have died. Our airfields on Munda might have been overrun again. History remembers the big ships, the battleships, the carriers, the cruisers. But sometimes, history hinges on 3 wooden boats, drifting in the dark. Smith finally gathered us mid-deck. "Homeward bound," he said quietly. "Stay sharp. We're not out of danger yet." We turned southwest toward Rendova, the main PT base in the new Georgia group. The ride back should have taken an hour. Instead, it stretched into 2, then 3, as we zigzagged to avoid known Japanese patrol routes. Every time I saw a faint shadow on the water, my hand tightened around the .50 caliber grip. Shadows kill you out there, literally and in your mind. By the time Rendova's faint outline appeared, my legs felt heavy, my throat dry, and my mind exhausted from staying wound so tight. The familiar smell of fuel, salt, and damp jungle drifted across the water, and for the first time since the attack, a weight lifted from my chest. We rolled into the harbor at low speed, the pier lanterns glowing faintly through the dawn mist. Men from other squadrons gathered as word spread of what we'd done. Some stared at our smoke-stained faces, others at the empty torpedo racks. There were no cheers, no applause, just a quiet recognition. Those looks sailors give each other when they know you've danced with death and somehow walked away. I stepped off PT 164 onto the wooden pier, my legs wobbling beneath me. I hadn't realized how much I was shaking until my boots touched solid ground. But I didn't collapse. None of us did. We just stood there, looking back at our boat, our fragile wooden miracle that had carried us through hell and back. That morning, as the sun finally rose over Rendova, the war felt far from over. But for the first time in a long time, I felt we had struck a real blow. Not a skirmish, not a harassment raid, a decisive, crippling strike. And it was only the beginning. But as the sun climbed higher that morning over Rendova, something else happened, something I will never forget. A runner from headquarters came sprinting down the pier, waving a clipboard. "Message from Comair Souls," he shouted. Smith took the page, scanned it, and his jaw tightened the way it always did when he was holding back a smile. He read it out loud so every man on our squadron could hear. "Enemy convoy attempting reinforcement of Kolombangara disrupted. 2 transports confirmed sunk. 3rd heavily damaged. Estimated 6,000 enemy casualties. No American losses. PT operations credited with decisive action. No cheering. No shouting. Just the kind of silence that falls when men understand they have done something that will matter long after they're gone." That night's ambush off Vella Lavella became one of the defining moments of the PT campaign in the Solomons. We weren't heavy cruisers. We weren't battleships. We didn't have radar suites the size of houses or armor thick enough to stop a shell. What we had were wooden hulls, 4 torpedoes, and a willingness to slip into the jaws of the enemy and strike from the shadows. And that was enough. Weeks later, when I walked the docks at Rendova, I heard younger sailors whispering the story, how 3 PT boats had stopped a Japanese reinforcement wave all by themselves, how the destroyer's searchlight missed us by inches, how our torpedoes turned the sea into fire. Every retelling grew slightly more dramatic, as stories tend to in war. But the truth remained simple. We were there, and we survived. By August 1943, the Japanese began pulling back from the Central Solomons entirely. Kolombangara was abandoned. Their casualty lists soared. Their ability to resupply in darkness, once their greatest strength, was shattered. The ambush off Vella Lavella inflicted not only physical damage, but psychological damage too. The Imperial Navy began to fear the night. They began to fear the silence. They began to fear us. 3 small boats, engines whispering, waiting in the dark. PT crews rotated out of Rendova as the campaign pushed northward. I stayed with PT 164 for months afterward, fighting in the waters off Bougainville and Treasury. But nothing ever matched the intensity, the terror, or the clarity of that night in July when time slowed to a heartbeat and the fate of thousands hung in the balance. And now, 8 decades later, the memory remains sharp. The glow of burning ships on the horizon, the sting of tracer fire slicing the air around us, the roar of the Packards as we fled into the night, the quiet afterward, when all you could hear was the soft lap of water against the hull and the realization that we had lived to see another dawn. People often ask me what it felt like. The truth is simple. It felt like standing on the edge of the world, gripping a weapon that wasn't supposed to matter, and watching it change history. America's PT boats were never meant to win battles alone. But sometimes, in the darkest hours of the Pacific, they did exactly that. And I was proud, damn proud, to serve aboard one. So if you ever hear someone say the PT boats were just plywood toys, remember this. On the night of July 20th, 1943, off the coast of Vella Lavella, 3 of those toys sank 2 enemy transports, crippled a third, and stopped one of Japan's last major reinforcement attempts in the Central Solomons. And we did it from the shadows. If you're listening to this now, just know, stories like ours only stay alive if people continue to tell them. And that part, my friend, is in your hands. Thank you for hearing my story. Now, friends of the channel, if you enjoyed this journey through one of the most decisive nights of the Pacific War, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and turn on the notification bell for more real World War II stories brought to life with immersive narration. Tell us in the comments which country you're watching from. We often get viewers from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, or Australia. So if you're there, drop a greeting below. And if you're watching from anywhere else in the world, we want to hear from you too. Leave it in the comments. It helps us a lot. Thank you for joining us in this episode, and we'll see you in the next documentary.